All right, and we are here with civil attorney, and I always get confused if you're on the because you switch, you flip flopped before on me, right? You were you're on the defense now.
No, no, no. So I was on all civil cases, but I was on the defense side for 26 years of my career. And then 5 years ago, switched over to doing strictly plaintiffs work. I did handle some plaintiffs cases even during my defense years, but 99% of my work back then was defense. But now I've been on the plaintiffs personal injury side now for 5 years.
And you were with Martin Hardy and Mazzotti out of New York,
Correct.
and one of the things that I've always enjoyed talking to you about, are obviously, we shared the Garrett Phillips case. You were just entrenched in that, and you have been, and always will be. And I to this day champion for that young man and how he didn't get his justice, but
Yeah.
we share that in common, along with just a plethora of other things. And I think that it's great that you came on the show, and I appreciate you doing this.
Happy to be here as always and good seeing you again.
Good to see you too. And so I email or I messaged you the other day. I said, "Hey, Tom, you familiar with the Delphi case? It's
Yeah.
kind of the major case out there right now,
Yes.
and everybody's talking about it. It is just, and it's a case that I've covered for some time. Major break in the case. Richard Allen arrested nearly 2 weeks ago, and um, the documents are sealed.
Right.
You can't see a probable cause affidavit. The judge signed off on it, who has now recused himself because psychotic online sleuths have doxed his family and put photos up, and just
Right.
really getting in the way of, unfortunately, I know the guy that did it, like, not personally, but I'm very familiar with him. He runs
Okay.
he runs in our community.
Circle, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know the guy personally, but that's a story for another time, and I feel terrible for. So the judge has recused himself because Delphi is just this tiny little place, and now they've handed it over to a more seasoned, more judge with high profile. How, I mean, in your opinion, and in your expert opinion, really, why would they seal this?
So good question, and we should wind back a little bit. I know your audience knows this case, I'm sure, but it goes back to February 13 of 2017 when these two girls go missing. Their bodies are found the next day, not far from the abandoned bridge over the Deer Creek in Delphi. There was actually warrants that were issued by the FBI back in 2017 that were sealed, and only recently, I should say recently being in the last 5 or 6 months, maybe, when they searched the property owner's farm, Mr. Logan, who was never charged. He's since passed away. But we have, Richard Allen. The police actually must have gotten a warrant about 2.5, 3 weeks ago or so, because by all accounts from neighbors, his property, his house was searched, his car was taken back on October 13th. That leads to the district attorney or attorney general, whoever the prosecuting attorney is out in Indiana, to file an affidavit with the court, a probable cause affidavit. That's an ex parte thing, by the way. Of course, the defendant is not, made aware of this, or the future defendant, I should say, at that point. Judge says, yep, probable cause exists based on the evidence they collected to issue an arrest warrant. He's, I think, taken into custody October, I want to say 26th, has an initial hearing on the 28th. And the judge agrees that, yeah, we're going to seal the charging information documents and the probable cause affidavit. And basically, by the way, I reached out to a district attorney buddy of mine, who then reached out to actually a former Indiana attorney general to get some on the ground information, if you will. So basically, the information I got on this, while it's not customary for an Indiana court to seal an affidavit of probable cause. From time to time, this is done. If the court determines, and this has to be requested typically by the district attorney or prosecuting attorney's office, as I understand it, if that affidavit contains information, evidence, documents, or whatever, that if publicized, okay, could jeopardize an ongoing investigation or prejudice some aspect of the case, the judge will, in certain circumstances like this, seal that, prevent it from being public. Now, that doesn't ultimately prevent the defendant or Mr. Allen's attorney, whoever his attorney might ultimately be, and I know we're going to get to that in a little bit, from seeing this. But it does happen, not often, but it does happen from time to time, and this is in the discretion of the judge who's reviewing this to decide, yep, I'm going to make sure, for now at least, this isn't public.
And legally, that's something that they could do. I mean, we are dealing with constitutional issues here. Is this something that could come back later? Because Richard Allen just the other day petitioned the court, if you will, begging for a lawyer. He's been moved secretly. Do you believe he's seen the charges against him?
So I don't know that he's necessarily seen the charging information or the probable cause affidavit as yet. Okay. So again, Mr. Allen initially said, I'm going to hire my own attorney. Then, just like you mentioned, I think it was 2 days ago on the 9th, a handwritten letter is filed with the court where he throws himself on the mercy of the court and says, hey, I didn't realize how expensive it would be to hire a lawyer. I'm not working because I'm in jail. My wife can't work because she's got to abandon the house. We don't have any money. So he's going to get a public defender, appointed for him. That said, and to wind back for a second, the prosecuting attorney, I think his last name is McClelland. He basically said, look, we're keeping this investigation open. We're keeping the tip line open, the email line open. We encourage people to keep responding. And for those reasons, among others, they petitioned the court to have this sealed. That doesn't prevent the defendant's attorney from ever seeing this stuff, because ultimately they get to see it, certainly. And there's going to be pretrial discovery. In theory, they're supposed to be provided access to all of the evidence that the state has. Whether or not Mr. Allen himself has seen the charging information or the probable cause affidavit, I have no idea. He presumably hasn't, because he's basically saying, I need a lawyer, and he's going to have a public defender appointed to assist him, certainly. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for him or any constitutional challenges or anything as to the charges.
They're not denying him counsel, and he was at his arraignment offered that, and he says, well, I'm going to get my own, not knowing. I mean, lawyers are expensive. It's just an expensive process, and he's in for probably the fight of it. I would say probably he's in for the fight of his life legally. And so, a public defender is going to be his best option with no money. But so they keep him in jail. They've moved him now secretly because this is all sealed. But his bond was abnormally high. Now his bond's been rescinded. He doesn't have bond, but I believe that it was a $20 million bond. Does that go to the strength of evidence?
So I think there's two parts to that, actually, Josh. I think partly it has to do with the strength of the evidence, but also it has to do with the nature of the crimes that were committed here. There's murders of these two young teenage girls, horrifically taken, just absolutely brutally murdered, these two girls. And so when I think the judge is looking at both the evidence, the nature of the crimes, and okay, if in fact this is the guy that did this, we want to make sure we keep him, under lock and key, because if he somehow were to, let's just say they'd set bond or bail or whatever at, $50,000, and he posts, and now you have a concern about, flight risk and all those other things. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but part of it, it's going to be both the evidence, I think, and definitely the nature of what happened here. You see this in these very egregious cases. You often see the judges set, bails exceedingly high. Now, keep in mind, I'm in a state that now has cashless bail and all that other stuff that's been going on. So I don't even know what's going on with it, to be quite honest with you, anymore. but that,
We used to call it the Wild West. It's the Wild East now.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So anyway,
Yeah, well, so that's interesting that you say that. We're dealing with a bit of that in California too. It's like extreme violent offenders, basically, or you know somebody got cut loose the other day. It was a felon running from the cops that had a loaded firearm, and they cut him a citation.
yeah,
And it's just like, okay, well, where's the incentive to not break the law? But once again, that's a topic for another day.
right.
Um, you know, I just think that I'm always saying, well, is this going to come back to bite them? Is this going to come back? So they had arrested him on that Friday, and then announced charges on Monday. Uh, it's 72 hours is what they said that they had to announce charges. Um, is that standard? Like, is that a standard thing? Like, they arrest them, they don't have to announce charges. I think somebody said it was 24 hours for misdemeanors, 48 hours for felonies, but Indiana, for some reason, says 72 hours. So basically, he was arrested on suspicion of murder. I've
Right.
never, not that I'm a legal mind at all, I've never heard of suspicion of murder.
So it's, just terminology, but, it's an interesting timeline. So as best we can tell, and digging through news articles and whatnot, I think his property was searched on the 13th. So presumably they had a warrant, because I seriously doubt he gave them consent. And by news accounts, the neighbors said they presented him with a piece of paper when the sheriff showed up that evening. So,
Right.
presumably there's a warrant. I believe he was actually taken into custody on the 26th. He had his initial hearing on the 28th, but then they had this news conference on, what was it, Monday the 31st. So, and that's when, it became known. I mean, information had leaked out. Somebody had been taken into custody. I remember hearing about it on the radio on my way home from work, and then certainly read up on it about when I got home. So, it's an interesting timeline, but, whether you want to call it suspicion of murder or whatever else, he eventually gets charged, I believe, with 2 counts of murder. And in Indiana, they just have murder. They don't have like first, second, third, as I understand it. I could be wrong on that, but that's from what I read and listened to in some of the news accounts talking about after the press conference by the sheriff of Carroll County and then prosecuting attorney McClelland.
And I'm gonna deviate here a little bit and throw you a curveball. Are you familiar with the Keegan Klein aspect of this case?
So no, and I know there were a couple of people that were looked at. One was some sort of a sex offender or something like that, but nothing ever came of those. And I don't know if that's one of the people that may have been looked at by the authorities at some point.
So he was arrested on child pornography charges, and he apparently was catfishing young girls with other people's profile pictures. He had contact with, I believe it was Libby that day, Abby or I can't remember which one, but he was talking to one of the girls, and on the day before the murders and the day of the murders, okay, he was arrested on those charges, the child pornography charges, but he's never been charged in the crime with this crime.
Right.
But now he just the other day asked they are working on a negotiation plea. A lot of people believe that maybe he's the one that tipped them off to the police. They just dropped 5 charges. He had 30 counts. It's down to 25 now.
Wow.
This all seems to be kind of coinciding with the arrest of Richard Allen. I mean, obviously this is all speculation, but is it possible that he's possibly cutting a deal? Or
It's possible. And because, I think, as I understand it, in Indiana, if you're an accessory to murder, you can be facing, so if somehow he was connected, and we don't know, this is speculation. Let's just say somehow he's connected to Richard Allen, maybe through internet, whatever, online stuff. And maybe, we don't know, maybe he's the one who essentially, as part of maybe a plea deal or what, tips the police off, says basically, look, I have information that may help you in this if you want to toss out some of the counts against me. I mean, if he's in jail and going based on, child pornography stuff or whatever it was, he's going to be facing significant jail time as it is.
Right.
And he certainly probably doesn't want to be in any way, shape, or form connected with Mr. Allen, certainly given what Mr. Allen appears to be facing. So it's possible. I mean, I know it's speculation, but where there's smoke, there's fire. And we don't believe in coincidences in criminal cases. That just coincidences aren't coincidences; they're incidences.
Where I'm from, the crazy YouTube world, that's all we believe in are coincidences.
The crazy YouTube world. Yeah.
But I don't either. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in Occam's razor. I see this whole back and forth kind of thing where it's like, he had a trial coming up. They've asked for a continuation. This is the second time now. A judge granted it. A judge dropped some charges. This case didn't pick up steam until Keegan Kline was arrested and was in custody talking with police. Now, once again, he is not charged in this. Neither is Mr. Logan. A lot of people, bridge guy, you hear this bridge guy thing constantly. There are people out there that still believe that the bridge guy is Logan. I do not believe that for a second. I believe that the guy on the bridge is Mr. Richard Allen. Okay. I think that's the guy.
There's a resemblance there. I mean, especially, and now he's got his head shaved with the orange jumpsuit or whatever, but there's certainly a resemblance. I know that the other suspect sketch that was released was a very different, I happened to print these things out earlier, bridge guy and the fairly young looking guy who doesn't seem to match anything. And I don't know where that came from originally, but yeah, looks like the guy to me, but hey, what do I know?
And you don't really roll out the red carpet if it isn't bridge guy, right? I mean, that's just my thought.
I mean, they obviously had to have significant evidence for the judge to agree that, yes, I'm going to authorize an arrest warrant, and they're bringing the charges that they brought. I mean, and they're on a fairly tight track. I mean, right now, I think the preliminary conference, pretrial conference, is January 13th of 2023, and they have a March 20 trial date of 2023 for Mr. Allen. Now, more than likely, those things are going to change once he gets counsel involved. We do have speedy trial requirements under the Constitution. I get all that, but that's really fast.
And that's what it is basically. Is hey, you need a speedy trial. You're offered a speedy trial. Right. They typically get pushed back for a judge kind of grants, works with that. But yeah, it is extremely fast, his trial date. And
prosecuting attorney Nick McClellan in the I think it was the October 31st press conference, he said, in referring to the sealed affidavit, he said, look, this, I think his words were, this is going to become evident at some point. It will be released later. So we're going to see more of this come out, certainly before the trial, I would expect. And we'll know a lot more as to why the police really thought Richard Allen is the guy that is responsible for this, allegedly.
What did you think of that press conference?
It was interesting. I only got to listen to parts of it. I thought the sheriff was really interesting. He's very emotional. You could hear it in his voice. But the DA or county prosecutor Nick McClellan, he said, I believe his quote was, there are certain days you remember in your life. And one of those was February 13th, 14th as well, when they found the bodies. And he said another day for him was October 28th, when this guy is in court for the first time, being arraigned or whatever they call it out there. So it was powerful.
The craziest part, this is stuff like, obviously this is real life, you know, and I don't mean to boil it down to movie type
Yeah.
script, but I mean, it really, you know, the guy lived in Delphi, worked at the CVS,
Yeah.
in the 5, 6 years. He came forward as a witness early on in the investigation, said he was out there on the trails.
So that last part, I did not know about. I'd read articles about the family. They didn't know him specifically, but they were aware that, yeah, he worked in the local CVS. And, going back to something you said earlier, Josh, Occam's razor. I mean, while we do have, unfortunately, in this world, random acts, we have people that come and go from, community to community and commit horrific crimes. A lot of times, though, it is people, in the local community, and nobody knew. No one would have ever guessed that it would have been, this guy, that guy, or whoever else type thing. So
I think one of the big reasons that they didn't, everybody said, well, he lived in your town. He lived in your town. I don't think that the people of that town believed what the cops were saying, that he actually lived there. I don't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to think it's one of your neighbors, right?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Who's crazy enough to do that? Well, somebody is, apparently. But yeah, I think that a lot of them were like, it's kind of the boogeyman. Like, yeah, there's somebody that was here that did this horrific crime. But then you start going, well, they'd have to know the trails. They'd have to know, it seemed like he had pushed them to one side of the bridge.
Right.
He knew that they, were going this way. And so, but yeah, a lot of people were like, man, it's just, I can't believe that he was in town and lived here among us. But that's usually how it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, I sometimes I think, like, what's my neighbor up to? I would never, they could have a dungeon, or for all I know. And
just think what they're thinking about you.
Well, look, I know what they're thinking about me. And I do have a dungeon, but it's where
you're in it.
Yeah, I'm in my dungeon right now. Yeah, I think that too. They're probably like peeking out the door, like, what's that guy up to? Poor 90-year-old lady living next door to me is going to listen to this and go, what the hell did I do?
Right.
But yeah, so you just never know. But what a strange case, and going forward, it's going to get more and more intense. I think a lot of the reason that this is sealed is because of the public interest too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think
that's a good enough reason.
In and of itself, probably no. So, a judge definitely has to look at aspects of the evidence that somehow, if this becomes public, it can jeopardize an aspect of the case or prejudice something, even potentially prejudicing the defendant. That would be bad too. We have, constitutional rights for a reason. So, in and of itself, public inquiry, no, but it's part of what the judge is looking at in relation to everything else. Yeah,
the totality of everything, right? Yeah, yeah, it's going to be interesting, going forward, and I look forward to kind of bouncing ideas off you as this happens. It's gonna unfold fast because I believe the 22nd there's a public hearing about this sealed probable cause. And it could all be released depending on what the judge thinks.
Exactly.
And all hell will break loose. I mean, I can already, that's the problem with the public's interest. I am technically, I'm not saying technically, I'm all for whatever gets justice. I know there's a lot of people, a lot of reporters, a lot of people that don't really matter that much are like, hey, this is public information. Mm-hmm. We get these all the time. Why are you doing this? And I can see why they are. Mm-hmm. I understand it. And I do actually support it because whatever gets a fair trial and justice. And look, Richard Allen is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, but not in the court of public opinion. I mean, people have already damned him. I hope he doesn't get a fair trial. That's just not how our justice system works.
Correct.
I mean, he gets and I've explained this to people. Richard Allen gets the same rights as you do, as I do, as any of us do.
Right.
We are all afforded those rights. And if he is guilty, and I really do hope the evidence is just overwhelming, because you don't want there to be any doubt,
Yeah, I mean, if
and
this is the guy, you want to make sure it's the right guy. They have the evidence, and it's and he gets his due in court. Absolutely. Um, you don't want this to be, well, we've seen in other situations that we won't go into right now.
my friend, I think about that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
People say, "Oh, DNA this, DNA that." I said, DNA doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean, it unless it's like direct blood evidence, like, oh yeah, like we found a pint of this person's blood, or they challenge everything, which I get, like that's how it works. But it used to be that DNA was it. That was it, man. You got DNA, you're nailed. Now they challenge. We could talk about Star Mix, and I think about that all the time. That Star Mix is used everywhere. I mean, and the DNA testing. So, you get a lawyer, a good defense lawyer. I mean, he'll just throw the kitchen. It's like the Scott Peterson trial. That's when they said, "Oh, well, the dogs hit on a cadaver dog hit on the dock," and then the defense brings in a guy who goes, "Oh, that dog didn't know what he was doing." And then you go, "Well, who the hell? So what the hell are we talking about here?" One says yes, one says no. They're both experts. That's just how these trials work. So, any defense lawyer is going to, unless it's direct DNA, i.e., like semen or blood or things like that. Kind of hard to explain how that stuff gets somewhere, but thumbprints and that they'll do everything. They'll just. I mean, you've dealt with that, I'm sure. What I would consider ridiculous arguments, but I'm also not a defense attorney, and I would probably go Jose Baez on on everybody if I had to. Did I ever tell you about the conversation I had with him?
No.
So it was on Instagram. We messaged back and forth, but we were going to set up an interview, and it just never happened.
This is Casey Anthony's lawyer, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And I've always been like not a fan of the guy because of what he did to like George Anthony, and he accused, hey, he molested her, he did all this baseless stuff. And I remember I messaged him and I said, hey, this is how I started it. This was in my much more unmature years, which was like last year. I said, hey, scumbag. That's how I started it. And he writes back, hey, douchebag. And I said, okay, well, we're going to get along fine.
And you're on the same page.
Yeah. And then we started talking a little bit, and he's just a defense attorney, man. I mean, when him and I were, he's like, you gotta, I still think that those kind of tactics are kind of scummy. And I'm surprised that a lot of judges allow that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah.
But if it's allowed, they're going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, how far over the line can I step?
And I would really blame the judge, going, well, what evidence? Because wouldn't you have to have something to make that argument? You can't, like, just out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, the judge is supposed to be, of course, and among other things, a gatekeeper as to evidence. What's coming in, what's not, what can you talk about, what can't you talk about? And, there's some judges who are really strict and firm, and there's others who are not. And that's both on the civil side of the world and on the criminal side of the world as far as judges go. And everybody knows, this is in my world to be like, that's a plaintiff judge or that's a defense judge. In the world, that's a prosecutor's judge, that's a defense attorney's judge. They're out there. Now, I think the vast majority, trust me, the vast majority are even-handed, fair as fair can be, try to do the best they can, but they're all human, so.
Yeah, right. I mean, we see that kind of stuff a lot. And, that's a great segue here,